Today, we're going to talk about knowledge graphs. It's how things are connected so that we can make inferences. And this is my knowledge graph. You can see at the bottom, I'm a rower. I spend my weekends in a single or a double, sculling and enjoying the sunshine as I try to forget about the stresses of the week. I'm also have a technical background. I studied applied math and mechanical engineering, and I went to MIT for strategy and innovation. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Schema App, and I spent 14 years at Cisco. So I learned a lot about the challenges of being innovative and agile in the organization. I'm also Canadian, so you might hear me say, eh? And I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. So you're giggling because you have inferred that you can now win the Kevin Bacon game. This same inferencing is what machines, AI, and search do when they read your schema markup and understand the relationships between the different entities on your website. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Because your structured data, your knowledge graph, is that data layer that's explaining and talking to the machines, helping them understand who you are and how to answer your consumers' questions. And over the last year, Google and Microsoft started talking about schema markup again. I've been doing this for a decade, so I listen when they talk. And it was really interesting because in May, multiple announcements were made. Google updated their documentation to say, in order to stand out in their AI experiences, to make sure that you were using structured data and that it matched the content on your page. Now, interesting enough, the next day, Bing also started to say that Index Now, which they've been talking about for years, tells them when a page is updated, but they were going to look to the structured data to find out what has been updated. Now, why do I mention Microsoft and Google? Well, I'm all about prioritizing. There's lots of things going on in the world. But when we actually look at the market share, Google still owns, I think it fluctuates between 88 and 91% of search. And ChatGPT on the AI platforms still represents the majority in the 70 percentile. And so when we think about sort of where we're going to spend time understanding and optimizing, I like to focus on these two. Now, I always like to refer to research because there's lots of talk right now. Where does schema markup have an impact? Who's using it? Well, in this study by ASO, they actually looked at pages with schema markup and without schema markup. And they found that those with detailed schema markup, and there's a research that came out just today talking about the difference of detailed schema markup versus basic schema markup, it was more accurately understood and sourced by AI. And in this study, they were specifically looking at ChatGPT. So today I'm going to take you on a journey to why schema markup is way more strategic than just search, especially if you work in the enterprise. So if you think of the foundation, schema markup is what we've been doing today. It's sort of optimizing that page and explaining what it's about. But when we add entity linking, we're actually augmenting that schema markup into what I like to call a content knowledge graph. And semantic technology has been around for a long time, and I'll explain a little bit about how we do this. And when we go to a content knowledge graph, all of a sudden we unlock these different areas within the enterprise where all of a sudden this strategy in SEO can be future-proofing your organization for AI. So we've seen, and we have lots of evidence from our enterprise clients, that it's still helping visibility in search, whether that be through rich results, AI overviews, or actually just increasing clicks from non-branded queries. The second area that's relatively new is actually unlocking insights in content. So when you actually do this entity linking, all of a sudden you can understand what topics and entities your content is actually talking about. And in a large enterprise where people are publishing every day, this can be really powerful as to where you're going to invest new content and where you're actually going to need to be an authority and where you don't have the content to support that. And then the third area that unlocks is actually AI efficiencies within the organization. And I'll share today a little bit how CIOs, their biggest challenge is around data readiness. Well, good news. SEOs, by executing on schema markup in a semantic way to build a content knowledge graph, can solve these problems. So let's jump in. How do we get to a content knowledge graph? So I'm going to share today a couple advanced best practices so that you can go and execute on those tactics when you go back to work. The first is actually around breadth and depth. The breadth has never been more important. Before, we were just looking at optimizing in order to get a rich result. But now we need to bring the context. Just like in my introductory slide where I told you all about me, all about the different aspects of me, guess what? We need to do the same thing about your brand, and it's looking to the structured data in order to make those connections so that it can do that inferencing. And so no longer is it good enough just to optimize the pages that can get rich results. We need to optimize the things that are going to tell your brand or your enterprise story. And then with regards to depth, and this is actually what the study just came out today, was talking about there's a difference between basic schema markup and I would say like deep, rich semantic schema markup. And this is again, where we're not just going to do the required properties in order to get a rich result, but we're going to make sure that we're leveraging the schema.org vocabulary. Most things, any kind of page has over 42 different properties for you to explain what it is and what its connections are to everything's on the website. And so this is, again, where breadth and depth is going to be more important. The study today said when there is depth, it actually drives better AI visibility and AIOs. So now let's talk about entity linking. Now, before I get started, I always like to say, well, what is an entity? People throw around this term, but it's a bit hard to understand. So I like to start with the thinking about a keyword. A keyword is just a word. So if I was describing my shoe, like the word is shoe, but that doesn't tell us a whole lot about the shoe. But if I say it's a black leather shoe, that's Vans, that's really comfortable, it's used for skateboarding, all of a sudden we're like, oh, I understand. I can picture that. I have that context of what that shoe is about. So when we think about entities, think of it having multi-dimensions where we're describing all the different elements of it. Now, when we talk about entity linking, there's two different types of entity linking. We have external entity linking and internal entity linking. Now, external entity linking, many of you might know it as like using same as, right? Where you're defining and using an external vocabulary in order to define or disambiguate something. But you can use more than same as. You can use any property. You can say, in this case, we're talking about, mentions. So our platform mentions knowledge graph. Well, of course, that's something that like our platform is all about. We're a semantic technology company. And so this external entity linking is really using external definitions to describe things that are important to the brand with the accurate relationship, giving context, right, to that relationship. Now, internal entity linking is a bit like interlinking or backlinking within your website, but again, now we're adding context. So instead of just linking to the highlighter, which is part of our platform, I'm actually saying like the highlighter is part of our platform. And so I'm again using properties within Schema Markup to give context. And when you do internal and external entity linking, all of a sudden you've built that content knowledge graph. All of a sudden there's more of those connections, just like in my introductory slide. Now, I always like to cite research. So Bright Edge did some research to say, so what? What about entity SEO? How much does it make a difference? And they found that not only robust schema markup got you more AI overviews, that when you did entity-based SEO and did really good work identifying entities within your schema markup, that authoritative content showed up 3 times more often in AI responses. Now, the world is constantly changing, but there's constant evidence we get from our enterprise clients that it's working. Now, I always like to give different ways to see this in action. So imagine that these are different pages on your website, and we have to now describe how are these related to one another. And so I just want to show the application of how you can use schema markup to define these relationships. So it's a software application. The provider is the organization, and I'm using the homepage to describe what that organization is. I might have an example of work. I might have a great YouTube video that has a demo of my product. And so I'm being very clear that this video over here is a sample of the actual work that the software does. Or even if it's an offering, it's a price, I'm explaining that that's really tied to that product. You can see also on the top, I'm using a same as. So here I'm actually describing that my organization is also defined in Google's knowledge graph, also defined perhaps in Wikipedia or Wikidata. So this is again telling that story. Now, one of our clients, Brightview Senior Living, also saw a 25% increase in non-branded queries after we were very diligent about articulating assisted living as one of their entities. This is an exciting time. because when we build this work, when we do this work, again, SEOs are kind of escalating to be data architects, to really preparing their organization to reuse this data layer. And in order to do that, if we're going to be reusing it across the enterprise, we need to make sure it's high quality. And so we like to think of schema markup as this ongoing iterative process. And I think especially in this time of AI, where we're learning new things every day from colleagues and different research, that we're constantly going back and saying, great, what's next? So that's the schema markup strategy. And then you're going to author the schema markup, you're going to deploy it to your site. But this management piece is something that people often overlook. And now it's not just about managing that the schema markup's dynamic and reflecting what's on your page, but it's also about managing the entities on your page, that we ensure that we're actually being an authority and calling out the topics that we want to be known for. Because if you read articles and research papers, they're often talking about authority. And so how are we as SEO looking at the data to understand that we're telling the machines in the machine language, that this is what we know about, this is what our product's about, this is what we help our consumers with. And then the final piece is around measurement. And I think measurement's especially fun. I like to talk about the dark funnel, how these times like we don't get to see a lot of that interaction. And I think as agents come, we're gonna see less and less of that. But we're actually starting to look at data based on entities. Like what if we were to actually look at performance based on an entity or what you wanna be known for? And what might that look like? Or what different types of answers and questions might we have? And this is all coming from the fact that we're building this content knowledge graph, that we're readying our data. Now, I told you that knowledge graphs aren't new, right? And it just isn't Google's knowledge graph, but it's a whole area of data architecture called semantic technology. And you'll hear words like ontologies and knowledge graphs. So Gartner brought up this study in June of this year, and they were talking about the AI hype cycle and how we're kind of coming into this like next rise. And the technologies that are going to be playing a key role on there, knowledge graphs are at the center of it. And I think the reason why, my hypothesis is because knowledge graphs ground large language models. They actually like complement them very, very well, and they help with scale. And scale is going to be the biggest challenge that especially that these newcomers have as we go into it. The other piece is Gardner talked about CIO's biggest challenge. People are investing a ton of money trying to get productivity out of the enterprise as a result of using and adopting AI. But their biggest challenge is data readiness. Well, good news, us SEOs have all the marketing data ready in order to do this work. And we're super excited because Schema App actually just released their MCP server. And we're working with some of our enterprises to reuse their content knowledge graph to help with on-site search, to integrate with Copilot as they sort of like step into this world of sort of using AI, but want to ground it, want to avoid hallucinations. And for those of you that don't know what Model Context Protocol or MCP is, I like to think of it as like, the USB-C port or the API for agents. And it really is sort of a connector or a de facto kind of standard that came out in November, and Google and OpenAI have said that they're going to support it. And what's really exciting about this is if you're in an enterprise and let's say you're using Copilot, you're using Microsoft, you can just like start connecting data. And then this will allow you to again reuse this amazing content knowledge graph that you've created. The last piece I want to talk about is NL Web. Now, this came out from Microsoft. Remember that week I mentioned where they announced all kinds of things? Well, this also came out. And this is an open project that can attach to any website that leverages RSS feeds and structured data to have sort of a natural language interface. And they've talked about sort of using it for agent readiness. Well, what's really cool is that the gentleman, R.V. Guha, who created this, actually was at Google as a technical fellow and started schema.org. And then he went to OpenAI and consulted to them with regards to AI. And now he's at Microsoft and building this. So it's a really exciting time. Don't take my word for it, but there's got to be a reason why they're looking to make it really easy to prepare websites for AI, and they're looking to leverage structured data out of the box for it. If you want to learn more, we've actually tested it, we've written about it, and we're actually meeting with Microsoft on Friday to talk to them about it. So I want to go back to what we call the value house, the amazing work that structured data can unlock for your enterprise. Again, it starts with schema markup, with breadth and depth. It kind of gets built on by making those connections and ensuring that you're building a content knowledge graph so you can unlock value in SEO, in content, and also help your enterprise really accelerate and work on AI efficiencies. Now, this all happens because we're building meaningful connections in your data. And Schema App's purpose is actually about building meaningful connections. And so, whether that meaningfulness is you downloading my awesome Mastering AI Search Essentials and Strategies and Insights, or coming by our booth and saying hello and sharing sort of what you got out of today's presentation, or maybe you have a Kevin Bacon connection that we should sort of connect on, please come by and have a conversation. For us, meaningful connections with this community is why we're here and why we love doing this. Now, I think I do have 2 minutes for questions if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, I'll be around. You can check out our booth. It's actually just on the hallway there. Thank you.